Okay, so as I said to you in the first video, there are often a lot of common traits between common access resources and negative externalities. So for example, clean air is a common access resource. So clean air is a common access resource because it's non-excludable and it's rivalrous in consumption because of the impacts of pollution and so on and so forth. So the negative externality is the cost imposed on a third party, which in this case, the negative externality is the fact that in the future, people aren't going to have access to clean air. So it's kind of like that distinction that the negative externality, in this case caused by pollution, leads to the fact that we're going to have less common access resources in the future. So intertemporal efficiency is reduced by the overconsumption of common access resources. And by people polluting and emitting carbon dioxide, that can lead to a reduction in common access resources. So what we're going to look at is how the government intervenes to try and preserve common access resources. So the government can implement a whole range of legislation. Often it involves banning the use of certain common access resources. It asks businesses to change their production techniques. And one of the main ways that they do it is getting people to issue permits or licenses. So essentially, basically allowing them to only use certain areas at certain times. So some examples of government regulation. And the best way to answer these questions is to provide examples of ways that the government regulate common access resources to help preserve them for the future. So one example is that cars can be fitted with what we call these catalytic converters, which basically means that they help them to reduce the amount of pollution that they create and helps to preserve the clean air. So that is one example, is ensuring that cars are fitted with these catalytic conversions, and that helps to reduce the pollution that occurs and helps to preserve the environment. And one that's probably a better one to use and probably easier is that they ban substances like CFCs. CFCs are basically products that can create holes in the ozone layer. So the ozone layer is a good example of a common access resource because the idea of it is that it's there, it's not excludable because it's right at the top over the atmosphere, but it's rivalrous because we can harm it through our consumption. So it's there and it protects all humans from harmful UV rays, but it is rivalrous and it can be depleted. So banning substances like CFCs helps to preserve the ozone layer and therefore protect a common access resource. Other examples, again, some more sort of, I suppose, more accessible examples of government regulation. So in Victoria, ducks can only be hunted between March and June. So ducks are considered a common access resource because they're rivalrous, in that there's only a certain amount of ducks. There's also limits on the amount of ducks they're allowed to kill a day. So certain ducks are not allowed to be killed, and other ducks you're only allowed to kill a certain amount a day to try and preserve the common access resource. So it's an example of government regulation where you can only hunt during certain months and you're only allowed to kill a certain amount of ducks per day to try and preserve this common access resource. Another example that's a good one to use is that certain areas of land when not allowed are excluded from excessive development. So Parks Victoria, for example, protects certain areas. At the moment they protect over 4 million hectares of important land. A lot of that's in like Phillip Island. You would have seen that when you went on your Year 10 camp. The idea is to ensure that this land is used in a sustainable manner so future generations can utilise that land as well. So protecting certain areas of park or recreations is an example of government intervention. Preventing the shooting of ducks and limiting the amount that you're allowed to kill is another example. Another example is that the government can ban certain production techniques. So commercial net fishing in Port Phillip Bay is not allowed, which basically means you can catch fish, but you've got to do it with a rod. You can't do it with a net, which is going to lead to excessive depletion of these common access resources. So the idea is kind of like not to be selfish and take too many of the fish. Other legislative initiatives like to reduce current consumption or destruction of common access resources and boost intertemporal efficiency can also be used as well. But there's plenty of examples there. You've got the banning of CFCs. You can talk about the fact that you can't kill ducks at certain times of the year, that certain land is protected, and that you can't use nets for fishing in certain areas like Port Phillip Bay and Corio Bay. Another way to protect these types of common access resources is through indirect taxation. So we can tax certain products, which will increase the relative price and alters the incentives for producers and consumers. Certain types of pollution reduces the quality of common access resources. So we can talk about the carbon tax. Even though we've looked at the carbon tax as a way to reduce negative externalities, we're also going to look at it as a way to try and reduce or try and preserve common access resources. So the carbon tax we'll look at in the next video as our example of preserving common access resources.